Well, earlier we talked about the uncertainties around climate science, but one fact is beyond dispute. In terms of CO2 emissions, coal is the dirtiest of all fossil fuels and the key climate issue. There are still at least 1,000 billion tonnes of the stuff under the ground. But can we tap these vast reserves without catastrophic effects on the climate? A British project promises clean coal, but could a £2 billion scheme to build one of the world's biggest carbon capture and storage plants in the north of England be an expensive gamble which might not pay off? Justin Rolat reports.
There were 171 working collieries in Britain before the miners' strike. By the early 90s, there were just 50. It looked like the industry that drove the Industrial Revolution and helped make this country the most powerful nation on earth was in terminal decline. But there are still a few coal mines left in Britain. This is Hatfield Colliery in South Yorkshire. Hatfield is one of just 5 working collieries left in Britain, but it is thriving, producing up to 40,000 tonnes of coal a week, far more than it did in its heyday back in the 30s. The surveys show that there are still millions and millions of tonnes of this stuff, high-quality coal, still under there. But the problem is, of course, that coal is dirty. In terms of carbon emissions, it's the most polluting of all fossil fuels. And coal is still a key part of Britain's energy supplies. It is used to generate a third of the country's electricity. So the challenge is this: is there a way we can use the estimated 3 billion tonnes of coal left in Britain without catastrophic impacts on the environment? There is a technology which promises to allow us to do just that. It's called carbon capture and storage, or CCS. The idea is it does exactly what it says on the tin, stripping out the carbon dioxide from fossil fuels and then pumping it into the depleted gas fields and saltwater aquifers under the southern North Sea for permanent storage. And Hatfield will be the site of Britain's first full-scale CCS project. The EU has put a £164 million grant towards a clean coal power station. The 900 megawatt plant will be right here beside the coal mine and is slated to be completed within 5 years. Now, Greens and environmentalists would say it's irresponsible to continue to invest in coal technology because coal is the dirtiest of all fossil fuels, isn't it?
Coal is the most abundant fossil fuel in the world. It's hard to conceive in the next 200 years that our dependency on it is going to go. So we've got to do something to tackle it. And carbon capture and storage is a good intermediary solution.
The hope is that the plant here at Hatfield will be the cornerstone of an even more ambitious project, a pipeline network linking the region's coal-fired power stations with its big industrial fossil fuel users, and which would allow them to pump their CO2 emissions out to the North Sea. And Yorkshire is an ideal place for such a project because it produces an extraordinary proportion of Britain's carbon emissions. If you want a sense of the scale of Yorkshire's carbon economy, just take a look at this. Drax is responsible for producing 7% of the UK's electricity. But just over here, look at this. This is Eggborough over there, and right on the horizon there, Ferrybridge. Together they're another 7% of the UK's generating capacity. Add it all together, and you've got 14% of the UK's electricity generating capacity right here in Yorkshire.
It's probably the biggest opportunity for CCS in the world, certainly the largest one in Europe. It's the single biggest thing that we could do as a region to cut our CO2 emissions. And if it was successful, it would cut the UK's emissions by around about 10%. So again, it would make a big impact on the UK's aims to be a climate change leader.
The hope is to capture up to 2/3 of the carbon dioxide the region produces, 60 million tonnes a year. But there is a crucial problem. the technology has never been proven on an industrial scale. And the biggest emitter in the region, Drax, which burns 10 million tonnes of coal a year, producing 22 million tonnes of CO2, says it won't be installing CCS anytime soon.
Carbon capture and storage is a solution, a critical part of the solution to reaching a low-carbon economy. But it's effectively emerging or developing technology. The technology in its different components are already quite well proven. But what it has never been done is it's never been scaled up to a size to make it commercially viable. And that's what's happening now with all these demonstration and test projects around the world. Drax, because we're so essential to the UK generation now, we're not the right site for a test bed. But I think in the future, it's very likely that there will be some form of CCS from Drax.
When do you think you might be installing some kind of carbon capture technology here?
It's a very difficult question. It really is one of those, how long is a piece of string? And the reason is that you need to work out how quickly the commercial development of carbon capture and storage will take. And it's simply hard to know. It's hard to know how fast it will move.
What's more, the project is expensive. £2 billion for the pipeline network alone. Far more if you include the cost of the equipment to strip out and compress the CO2 emissions.
They don't know what the final economics of carbon capture and storage is going to be because there isn't a fully integrated system up and running yet, and we're still a long way, actually, years from having one up and running. And even then, will it be able to deal with industrial scale carbon dioxide emission?
But back at Hatfield Colliery, Grant Budge says Britain will continue to need to burn fossil fuels for some time yet, and that carbon capture and storage is the only way to do that without damaging the environment.
It's not a final solution. We'd all love to have renewables and not, potentially not have things like this. But renewables are intermittent. They take up a lot of space, and you still have to have energy capacity in reserve for when they're not available. Our project will deliver clean energy at approximately half the cost of the current wind power generation in the UK. That has a value to the consumer.
So you're saying your power's cheaper, and you're saying you can deliver it carbon-free?
Yes.
And you're confident about that?
Yes.
Yeah, you get anywhere.
The day shift is over at Hatfield. This could be an image from Britain's industrial past. Big questions remain about carbon capture and storage, not least whether carbon dioxide can be permanently stored underground. But if the CCS network here in Yorkshire is shown to work, then coal mining could be part of Britain's low-carbon future.